So today we're going to be learning about simplifying square roots or simplifying radicals. Remember, square roots and radicals basically mean the same thing. So we learned about this last week that when you take the square root of something, you're basically looking for the number that when you multiply it by itself, you are able to get the answer. So for example, if I were to take the square root of 16, the square root of 16 would be 4 because I know 4 times 4 gets me 16. We also talked about how you guys have the calculator available to you. So if you weren't able to just do that in your head, you can just type in square root of 16 on your calculator. It'll tell you that it's 4, easy. We also learned last week, though, that sometimes I can ask you to find the square root of something and it gets you a long decimal because there is no number that when you multiply it by itself would get you that answer. So for example, over here, if I tried to tell you to find the square root of 20, think about it first. I can't think of any number that when you multiply it by itself will get you 20. But then just to double check, I'm going to go ahead and go to my calculator. And if I type in square root of 20, you get this very long decimal. So square root of 20 does not exist. But what we can do is we can actually simplify this to get the square root of 20. So here's how we do that. First thing that you want to do is make sure that it's already not a perfect square. So that's what I just did. So square root of 20, the first thing you want to do is plug it in your calculator. When you type it in and you get a decimal, you know you need to simplify it. Versus like square root of 16, when I type that in my calculator and I get a pretty number with like 4, so square root of 16 is 4, that's your answer. You're all done. You don't have to do anything else. So when you type in a square root and you get a nice number, you're done. That's your answer. If you type in a square root and get a decimal, you got to go on to the next step. So the next step, after making sure that it's not already a perfect square, you just can't take the square root of it already, is you need to create your list of perfect squares. Now this list of perfect squares I provide here for you, and I also provide it on the work you have to do on your green slide. Now the list of perfect squares, all I did was take the numbers 1 through 12 and just square them or multiply them by themselves. So for example, 1 squared or 1 times 1 is 1, which is how I got this number right here. 2 squared or 2 times 2 is 4. 3 squared, 3 times 3 is 9. 4 squared, 16. 5 squared, 6 squared, 7 squared, 8 squared, 9 squared, 10 squared, 11 squared, 12 squared. Now you can either do that on your head or type it in the calculator, but basically all I did was just take the numbers 1 through 12 and multiply them by themselves to get this list of perfect squares. So again, I provided it for you, but that's the explanation of how you get the list. Now you could go past the number 12. You could keep going and do 13 squared, 14 squared, 15 squared, and keep going forever. But I don't ask you to know anything above that, and you don't use anything above that in 8th grade. So list of perfect squares. You take the numbers 1 through 12, square them, and write those down. Okay, now the next part is you want to find the largest perfect square that divides evenly into this number that you're looking for. So I know the number underneath here is 20, and I'm trying to find the largest number from this list that divides evenly into this. So I wouldn't do 20 divided by 144, and I wouldn't do 20 divided by 121. That doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't get a nice answer. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the number that is less than that. So 25, I wouldn't do 20 divided by 25. I'm going to start with 20 divided by 16. Sorry, I have a piece of dog hair in my mouth. That's what I get for having 2 giant dogs. Okay, so if I type in, so I'm not going to bring my calculator back up. What you're trying to do is find the number from that list, the largest number from that list that divides evenly. So if I do 20 divided by 16, I get a decimal. It's a no-go. So I'm going to move down 1. 20 divided by 9, it's a decimal. That's a no-go. 20 divided by 4, however, gets me a nice number of 5. So what I'm going to do underneath it is I'm going to write the number from my list first, which was 4, and then 20 divided by 4 is 5. So these two numbers, when you multiply them together, you should get the first number that you had. This first number has to come from this list. I cannot stress that enough. You want to put the number from the list first, and then the original number divided by that number should go here. Now, the reason why you want to find the largest perfect square is that sometimes there might be a number in this list of perfect squares. You could have more than one number that divides evenly. That's why I always start with the largest numbers first, not the smallest numbers. So you just want to find the number next largest to it and start dividing from there, which is why I started with 16. So 20 divided by 4 gets me 5. That's my list. That's the number for my list of perfect squares. The reason why you want to write that number first from the list is because you can actually simplify that. So the square root of 4, if I were to take the square root of 4, I know that is 2. So instead of square root of 4, I cross that off and I would just write 2 square root of 5. Now, a cool thing about this is that if you were actually to type in the square root of 20 and 2 square root of 5, you would get the same answer because they mean the exact same thing. This is just the simplified version of it. So your final answer is 2 square root of 5. So again, make sure it's not already a perfect square. So square root of 20, I couldn't just take the square root of, it gives me a decimal. Next thing you need to do is find the largest number that divides evenly from this list of perfect squares, okay, which is given to you on that green slide. If you go back to your green slide that you're trying to solve, I have it on there for you. And then you want to simplify that first number, and that will get you your final answer. So if you have any questions, let me know. I did provide you guys an answer key on the next slide in the presentation if you wanted to check your answers as you go. That way, if you feel like you're getting them wrong, you can email me and I would gladly help you. So if you have any questions, let me know.